Who am I? And where do I fit? What do I stand for? What am I known for? What makes me me? These are the questions of identity. Our identity is who we believe ourselves to be at the core of our being. And for many years, I think identity was the issue that we wrestled with during our 20s. From that time, maybe where we started the second half of college and we started thinking about what was coming after that, through to the time maybe where we were settled down, maybe started a family, and those kinds of things we were wrestling with in those 20s, these questions of identity. Who am I really? And where do I fit? And what do I stand for? We had left maybe the identity that we had inherited from our parents, and were choosing what it was we were going to own for the days and decades ahead. Questions of identity. In recent days, I've decided that this issue of wrestling with our identity has expanded in time. It seems to start earlier than the second half of college, and it seems to be going much later than, say, to age 25 or 26. In some ways, I think it's an issue that the majority of us wrestle with to some extent or the other. All that leads to a question: how do I figure out my identity? And what is the nature of identity? Is your identity something that's predetermined and it's internal, it's within you, that you discover through trial and error, through experience? So is it that? Is it something that, if you're going to be true to yourself, it's already in there, but you've got to figure out what it is so you can live in keeping with it? Is that what identity is? Or is identity something that you choose? You can think about it and look at the options and pick the one you like. Or is identity something different from either of those? Is your identity something that's external, something that comes from outside of you and is placed upon you, that you live up to? Is it a role? Is it a name? Is it a cultural norm or a set of norms that you have placed upon you, and you have to choose whether or not you're going to live up to those? So what's the nature of identity? Is it predetermined and inside you? Is it something you choose? Is it external and placed upon you? As I've been thinking about this over the last several months, identity, I think for most people, is something that they find in just a few places. They find it in their roles, right? Husband, wife, father, mother, coach, those kinds of things. They find it in their roles. They find it in their tribes, the people that they associate with, right? The other people who have the same hobby. Could be the people who have the same sexual orientation. Could be people who have the same political views, but they find their identity in their tribe, in their community, in the places where they seem to belong relationally. Third, I think most people find their identity in their performances, in their accomplishments, right? The things that they think have set them apart and perhaps made them a step above others. So they find it in their roles, they find it in their tribes, they find it in their performances. And that's not new. That's been going on for many, many, many years. I think perhaps the part that's maybe new is people who are finding their identity in their preferences, and that their preferences make up the sum of who they are and what they're going to stand for and where they fit in life. But how about you? How will you decide? How will you know what is your identity? While you're thinking about that, let me just pause and talk to you about why I'm doing this series. As I look out among friends and acquaintances and even strangers, I'm observing significant angst. I'm seeing in people this angst, this pressure to find themselves and to choose everything, choose their values, choose their career path, choose their friends, choose their geographic preference, choose their spouse, choose their sexual orientation, and now even choose their gender. And that pressure to find and determine and choose all those things in an effort to be true to themselves, that pressure is creating unbelievable angst in people. And I see that. I see also a significant amount of identity crisis. People who feel the pressure but can't figure it out, and they can't figure out where they belong and where they fit and who they are and what they stand for. And that results in the third thing that I'm seeing, which is significant aimlessness, a paralysis that stems from a lack of core, solid identity. At the same time, I observe in history that people who had a solid core identity lived well, and they made a positive impact. There are lots of examples we could look at. Jesus, of course. Joseph, I was thinking about talking to you about him, but Pastor Joel's going to do a series on Joseph soon, so I'll leave that to him. I look at other non-biblical stories, such as Eric Liddell. Perhaps we'll look at his story in a week to come. But people who had a solid core, they seemed to know who they were, and the circumstances they were in didn't change that. Those people seem to live well and make a positive impact, and I want that for me, and I'm sure you want that for you, to know who you are and to have it not be changing depending on who you're with, or just changing depending on the circumstances you're going through, but to know who you are and to be able to live out your life from that solid foundation of a solid core identity. I also see in the Bible some folks who didn't have a very solid core identity. I think of King Saul. I think he was like that. And you look at the trouble that caused for him. So this is not a new thing for us, but man, it seems to be getting stronger, a greater, a worse trend in our day and age. And so I wanted to do this series with you. I'm well aware of the fact that I don't feel like I'm an expert in this area, but I figured it was better to take a swing even if I couldn't hit a home run. And so we're going to do this together. I'm working at this with you and hoping to learn with you about what it means to have a solid core identity, a rock bottom foundation to the answers to those questions of who am I, where do I fit, what do I stand for, what makes me me, and then to be able to live out from that solid foundation. You know, knowing who we are matters as much as we all think it does, but probably not for the reason that we think it does. We think it matters because we think that we won't be happy and fulfilled unless we're aligned with our true identity. And that's probably true, right? That we won't be happy and fulfilled unless we're aligned with our true identity. But it also matters even more than that. Because it matters because we always live out our sense of identity. That's a simple fact. We always live out our sense of identity. Who we believe ourselves to be at the core of our being, we live from that basis. We live out of our core sense of identity, and we live out our core sense of identity. What we believe ourselves to be comes out in our daily life. And getting our identity wrong would then cause us to live wrongly. And that's a really big deal if you're a Jesus follower. So it matters a lot, even more than we probably realize. Let me just throw out another fact for you as we get rolling here. If you don't get your identity vertically, by that I mean from God, you will look for it horizontally through like work, possessions, relationships, accomplishments, or like I said earlier, roles, tribes, and accomplishments or performances, right? And you'll look for it internally, the preferences. So let me just say it again. If you don't get your identity vertically, you'll look for it horizontally or internally. That's just a fact because we all live out of our sense of identity, and we need to know that sense of identity. And so we're always looking for it. And if you don't look for it vertically, you're going to look horizontally or internally. Those are the only other options you have. So how about you? How will you decide about your identity? And how will you make sure that what you say you believe about your identity remains the core of your identity? Lots of Jesus followers struggle with this. We say that we believe certain things because God had said them about us, and yet in practice, it's as if our identity is based on something else. So how will you make sure that what you say you believe about your identity remains the core of your identity? So I gave you a couple facts about identity, told you a little bit about why I want to do this series with you. Let me jump into what I believe is the assumption of the biblical writers of Jesus, of Paul, Peter, James, and so on, their assumption about identity is this, because this is the assumption that I'm going to approach this series from, regardless of your starting point. Here's where I'm coming from, and that is this, that the God who claims to have created us determines our core identity. The God who claims to have created us determines our core identity. And there are other facets of our identity, and they're important, but they're not core, and they come from other sources, some of which we even get to choose. All humans have at least two parts to their core identity, and all Jesus followers have at least two additional parts to their core identity. We're going to look at the first of those four in this particular message, and we'll look at the remaining three the next time we get together. All right, here we go. Let's look at the first part of our core identity according to God. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. They will rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the livestock, the whole earth, and the creatures that crawl on the earth." So God created man in his own image. He created him in the image of God. He created them male and female. And if you jump ahead to Genesis chapter 5, verse 1, you'll see this summary statement. On the day that God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. So there it is. The first one is this, image bearer. Image bearer. Now, you might not believe that mankind came into existence by creation. I get that. The creation account tells how and why we're image bearers. However, even if you're not sure you believe, what's written there in Genesis, know that Jesus and James and Paul all taught that mankind are image bearers. And so we're going to roll with that. All right? So what's an image bearer? An image bearer is one who bears likeness to God. It's one who reflects some of God's personal qualities or characteristics. He reflects God in some significant, deep, foundational way, right? You've got some of the qualities of God or some of the characteristics of God. You reflect that part of God, so you are an image bearer. You bear his image. Kind of like people talk about mini-me's, right? Someone who you look at and you're like, oh, I could tell, I could tell you are your father's child, right? Because they look just like them. Some people say that about Jonathan and me, right? He's my image bearer. So God said, when he was doing the creation thing, we're going to make mankind in our image. What did he mean by that? We're an image bearer. We're made in the likeness or the image of God. Well, over the years, theologians have agreed that there's at least 5 ways in which we are image bearers. The first is this: we are a living being with a spirit and a soul. So we have not just the material part of us, the body, but we have an immaterial part to us, a spirit and a soul, and we're living in that way. Second, we're self-conscious. And by that, I don't mean like self-conscious, like you're worried about how you're coming across in front of other people. That's a different kind of self-conscious. That self-conscious in that we are aware that we are a being, that we are aware of ourselves. We look in the mirror and we recognize that's us. Sometimes you've had this experience where there's this bird keeps banging into the window because he sees this other bird in the window, but doesn't realize it's him, right? Maybe you've got another pet who's looked in the mirror and then charged the mirror because he didn't realize that thing in the mirror, that's him. You're self-conscious. When you look in the mirror, you realize that thing in the mirror is not another person, it's you. So you're self-conscious, and you have the ability to make choices, and you have the ability to make plans and to carry them out. You have a certain intelligence. This is a way in which you share in the characteristics of God. Another way in which you are in the likeness of God is this: you're moral. You're able to discern between right and wrong. You're able to discern between good, better, and best. And because there is such a thing as right and wrong, then innocence is a real issue and guilt is a real issue. You're a moral being. You're also immortal being. Immortal. You're made to live forever, and you will do so. And then finally, as an image bearer, you're one who has the ability to have a dominion. A dominion is simply an area over which you have say, and what you will happens right? What you determine is going to happen here is what actually happens here. That's a dominion, a sphere of influence in which your will is done. You're able to have that dominion because you're an image bearer. Now, some of you who've read the Bible and studied it over the years realize, okay, that's the way we were created by God, but something happened pretty dramatically and is recorded in Genesis chapter 3, and that is this, that Adam and Eve failed to obey God. God had put them in a garden, made them image bearers, gave them one rule, and they broke the one rule. And as a result, things changed dramatically. That's true. That's true. I like how Charles Ryrie put it. He said, when sin entered the human race, the image of God in which man was created was not lost. One may say it was defaced, though not erased. And so, yeah, we are still bearing the image of God, but it's not as clear and accurate as an image as it once was. It has been defaced, but certainly not erased. So what are the implications? I ran through very quickly the fact that, we are image bearers, and that is part of our core identity. What are the implications for us? I mean, how does this change things? How does it impact life on Tuesday, the fact that you are an image bearer? How does it change what I go about with my business on Thursday and how people treat me and how I relate to others and how I function in society because I'm an image bearer? Well, I want to hit just a few of these big implications for our identity because we're image bearers, and in no particular order, but here they are. Number one, at your core, you are a being with tremendous dignity and worth, simply because you bear the image of God. Simply because you are in the image of God, at your very core, you are a being with tremendous dignity and tremendous worth. That worth was not assigned to you by any human, and therefore it can't be altered or removed by any human. That is so awesome, just to walk through life with that confidence, that you have dignity, you have worth, simply because you are in the image of God, that you look and act a little bit like Him in some way. You are created in His image, and therefore you have dignity and worth. And because no human gave that to you, no human can remove that from you. It can't be altered by anybody else. It can't even be altered by you. It can't be altered or removed by your inner critic. It can't be removed by a regrettable deed or a mistake that you made. Nothing you can do, nothing anyone can say, nothing anyone else can do removes your dignity and worth. It is baked in. Because you are made in the image of God, your life is worth something and is worth protecting. Genesis 9 verse 6 says, whoever sheds human blood, by humans his blood will be shed. Then explains why. Why is it that if your life is taken by someone, that has to be defended and justice has to be taken? He explains, for God made humans in His image. See, you are so much worth that justice is required if someone was to take your life. You have that dignity and worth. Matthew adds a really interesting thing where he's quoting Jesus. Jesus said, you've heard that it was said to our ancestors, do not murder, and whoever murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you, Jesus said, everyone who is angry with his brother or sister will be subject to judgment, and whoever insults his brother or sister will be subject to the court, and whoever says, you fool, will be subject to hellfire. Now, whoa, that last part, you fool, will be subject to hellfire. I mean, that's really, really strong. Jesus is saying here, anyone who says that, you fool, is in danger of hell. Now, how could this possibly be? Well, because of this. Jesus knows that murder begins in the heart. And how does it begin in the heart? It begins in the heart when you come to this point in time, when you look at somebody and you're like, you have no value. You look at them and you say, you're a fool. You're an absolute fool. You have no value. And you can hold that person in contempt. Jesus says murder begins in the heart. It begins when you can look at somebody and hold them in complete contempt. And Jesus knows that what starts in the heart couldn't come out in real life. And so you could actually end up murdering somebody if you can originally do the original sin of holding them in contempt in your heart. And that's what he's getting at when he says, you fool, right? Jesus also knows there is a version of murder that takes place in the heart. And I just said what version that is, contempt. And Jesus is pointing to the fact that when you and I hold someone in contempt, an image bearer in contempt, we are in serious, serious danger. Because that person that we hold in contempt is an image bearer, has dignity, has value, has worth, solely because they are created in the image of God. And James explains in James 3 verse 9 that slander is completely inappropriate. Because when you slander a person, the person you're slandering is an image bearer, a person of value and of dignity and of worth that's inherent. And just because they might have done what you believe they did, or they didn't do what it is you believe they didn't do, that does not remove their value, their dignity, or their worth. Let's move on. As a second major implication is the fact that because we are immortal, we will live forever, right? We will live forever. And the choices that we make have consequences that go with us forever. That leads to the third thing. Because we are moral beings, innocence and right and wrong and guilt are real things. They're not just figments of our imagination. They are not just social constructs. They are real because we are moral beings. And then when you put these two together, as I've already hinted at, we will live forever with the choices we make because we make moral choices and we are immortal beings. But we're also capable of making choices, making plans, which means that you can choose. And because you can choose, you can change. One of the lies that Satan tries to convince people of in every which way is this: you can't change. You're stuck. There's no hope. You will always be this way. It doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter what the promises you make to yourself or others. You are stuck. You are in this cycle. You are in this rut. You cannot change. That is a lie. You are created in the image of God, which means you can make choices and you can make plans and you can change. Now, as a side note, I mentioned earlier that there's one possible belief about this whole issue of identity, which is identity is something that's completely up to me and I choose. I can choose who I am at my core. You'd think about that. What if mankind's belief that his identity is his to choose is actually evidence of being created in the image of God? It's not evidence that the core idea is solely a matter of preference or choice. It's evidence that he's created in the image of God and therefore has the ability to choose. That's an interesting thought, isn't it? A fifth major implication is this: that your desire to be creative, your desire to bring order out of chaos, your desire to improve the world is noble, and it flows out of your ability to have dominion. That's awesome. And then finally, because you're an image bearer, you have the potential for fellowship. Let me use a different word: intimacy with God. Intimacy is the joy of being fully known with no fear of rejection. I think I heard that from Andy Stanley. It's that joy of being known, like really known, but having no fear that when you're known, you'll be rejected. We have that potential to have intimacy with God because we share his likeness. We also have the potential to enjoy doing things together with God. This is the fellowship part, because we share his likeness, because we are created in a way where we have some of his qualities and some of his characteristics. And this is all at the very core of our being. You are, I am, we are at our very core image bearers. Can you just pause for a minute? Let your imagination run with what we just talked about. I by no means gave you an exhaustive list of all the implications of what it means to be an image bearer, what it means to be someone who was made in the very likeness of God, what it means to actually reflect back a certain amount of God in our qualities and in our characteristics. But imagine for just a moment, how would life change if you believed that baked in you are a being of dignity and worth, so much dignity, so much worth, that you don't need to defend yourself because you know God will defend you. You don't need to make other people stand up and take notice of you because God stands up and takes notice of you. You don't need to point it all out to everyone else because God has watched and noticed every detail, simply because you're an image bearer. Wow. How would that change your life this week if you were just deeply aware of the fact that you're immortal? You're going to live. You're going to live forever. You're moral. And your right and wrong and your innocence are things that deserve attention because they're real. They're part of reality. They're shaping the life that you live. What if you were really convinced that life is good because God made you the way you are, and it's good that you're here, and it's good that you do what you do, and it's good that you, at least in certain ways, attempt to have a dominion, that you take ownership of the small sphere of influence that God has put in front of you, and that the world is better off when you exercise some dominion in your little area, bringing order out of chaos, right? Bringing creativity and resolved problems. What if you really believed that? And what if you really believed that at your core, because you are a person created in the image of God, you were destined to be known by God and not rejected by God, and to be welcomed by God and do life with God? Would that be different? Would life be different? Wow. So how about it? How will you decide about your identity? I said it earlier, I really believe it's true. If you don't get your identity vertically, in other words, if you don't let God tell you who you are, you're going to try to figure it out horizontally and internally. If you don't let God tell you who you are at your core, you're going to need to know who you are at your core, and you're going to try to figure it out. You're going to look at your work. You're going to look at your possessions and think maybe that explains who you are. You're going to look at your relationships and think, well, maybe that makes you who you are. You're going to look at your accomplishments. You're going to look at the things people say about you and they think maybe that makes you who you are. You're going to look internally at what you wish you were, who's the ideal. You're going to look at your preferences and try to figure out, is that who you are? I really believe this to be true. If you don't let God tell you who you are, you will need to know it, and so you're going to look in other places. And as you're looking, as you're thinking about who you really are, think about it. Is this core that you're searching for, is it predetermined and within you? Is that where you look? Do you look through your experiences? Do you try things on like trial and error? You try it on like clothes? Try this set of roles? Try these relationships? Try these preferences? Try these habits? See if that seems to click with who you are? Are you going to do it that way because, well, identity is internal and I figured out that? Is it just something you choose? Are you going to sit down with a pencil and paper, make a list? Or is your core identity, on the other hand, something that's made by God and affirmed by you? That's a huge option that we're talking about. That's another one on the table. Maybe your identity, your core identity, is determined by God and affirmed by you. This I know. Getting your identity right matters as much as you think it does, and probably more. And so I'm praying that through these few weeks that we spend together working on this issue of identity, that God will help us to get it right.